All right, good morning. Let's get started. So, a couple things before I jump into what we're going to cover today. Remember that the only thing you have due for this week is assignment 3.1. And again, that was just because I screwed up the due dates on it and I extended the deadline on that by a week. So, that's due Monday. That's your personal code of ethics. I noticed that several of you have already, most of you in here have already done that. Um, So I appreciate that. But we're on unit 5. Thank you, Jared. We're on unit 5. It's a 2-week unit. You will have an assignment for this unit, but it's not due until the end of the second week. So if you've already done your personal code of ethics, you're good for 2 weeks. We talked on, oh, and by the way, let me say this to this class and to my online folks. I realize that your personal code of ethics is somewhat of a personal assignment, but I always appreciate the effort that all students put into it, and it is a privilege to get to read your personal codes of ethics. I really enjoy getting to know more about you and seeing the insight and a lot of the wisdom that you guys have. I don't share it with anybody. I know that maybe you don't know me well enough to want to share the things that you do in there. And so I just want you to know I appreciate it. It's really a privilege and an honor to get to read those. You guys did a great job on them, as always. So we talked on Tuesday about intentional torts, both to persons and to property. So again, this week is all about intentional torts, meaning that the person who committed the act that consists of a wrong meant to do it. Next week, we're going to cover unintentional torts, but everything we've talked about so far this week requires intent on the part of the actor. And one of the torts that we talked about was defamation. So the case that I asked you to read, Dykstra versus Darling, is a defamation case. It is fairly recent. It came down, the decision came down in the summer of 2020. And so it is a relatively current case, but it involves 2 baseball players, and it goes back, gosh, to the 1980s with the stories that one was telling on the other. So I want to talk about that case for a little while this morning. This case is on your assignment for Unit 5, so there will be questions about it, but just like you've hopefully noticed by now, most if not all of the questions on your assignment we've addressed in class at some point. So pay attention in class and take good notes, do your reading, you'll do fine. So who was the plaintiff and who was the defendant in this case? Who wants to tell me that? All right, the plaintiff was Lenny Dykstra, and the defendant was who? Ron Darling. Okay, good job, Noah. Reading fast. All right, and what did Lenny Dykstra sue Ron Darling for? Jared. What's the name of the tort he sued him for? Defamation. Good. Remember, we have written defamation, which is libel, and spoken defamation, which is slander. So what kind of defamation are we dealing with here? So that would be, make it, no, slander spoken. Libel. There you go. Libel. Don't confuse, it's easy to confuse. In tort law, I've been saying a word that sounds the same, but we've been dealing with 2 different spellings of it. Libel, the defamation, the tort of defamation, libel, L-I-B-E-L, is not the same as when I've been saying a person is liable, but I pronounce them the same. Liability, libel is the word we use if somebody has committed a tort and they owe the other person for it. They're liable for their actions. 2 different words in this specific context. All right, so Lenny Dykstra sued Ron Darling for the tort of defamation, specifically libel. And what was it that Darling had done? Who can tell me what Darling had done that Dykstra objected to? Emma.
He basically said that he was a criminal and everything.
This is pretty broad. He painted him with a pretty broad brush, didn't he? Racist, misogynist, homophobic, criminal, drug user, dealer, something like that. He didn't hold back. There is a specific accusation that Darling made that the court quoted from Darling's book. What was that about? Kennedy, you remember what that was about? Do you remember the incident involving the World Series back in 1986? Yep, he did say all that, but there was an incident in the 80s in the World Series that Darling specifically talked about. Who remembers that? Jaron?
So it was kind of like towards the end of the game, he was yelling at the pitcher for the other team,
Right.
and he was yelling a whole bunch of obscenities, and he didn't want to get into the nitty-gritty because it was kind of dark.
Good memory. One of the things that Dykstra pointed out was that Darling had said he had yelled some super vile racist stuff at the opposing pitcher. Was any of this caught on camera or tape, or was it recorded in any way? Anybody remember that? No, it wasn't. Good, Nick. It wasn't. So this was just Darling's word against Dykstra's word for this case. So did this case go to trial? Judy, you remember that? It did not go to trial. That's right. Why didn't it go to trial? What happened before we got there? Who remember? Shanti, you remember that? It's okay if you don't. Who remembers why it didn't go to trial? What did Darling ask the court to do early on in the case? To dismiss it. That's right. He asked the court to dismiss it. And that is not I wouldn't say it's uncommon for defendants to ask the court for that, but I would say it's uncommon for the court to grant a dismissal. But the judge in this case did go ahead and dismissed Dykstra's complaint without even letting him go to trial. So what was Darling's argument as to why the court should just dismiss the case? Who remembers that? Say it again, Shanti. He wasn't able to show malice. That's close. There's a specific legal principle that Darling pointed to that said, even if I was lying about him.
It wouldn't defend him anymore.
Right. He used this doctrine of the libel-proof plaintiff, meaning that there are some people, and the court says this is very uncommon. It's extraordinary to find a person like this, but they found Dykstra to be that kind of person, that that their reputation is so bad that it can't be dirtied or destroyed or harmed any further. So that was what that is what Darling's argument was. So the court's opinion starts off first with this. The judge says, all right, whenever we're reviewing a motion to dismiss, we're going to look at the evidence in the light most favorable to the plaintiff, meaning because the defendant wants us to dismiss this, we're going to look at it and kind of assume that the plaintiff's what they're saying is true. Okay, we're gonna give them the benefit of the doubt when it comes to a motion to dismiss, not necessarily on whether or not they've proved their case, but just on whether or not the case should be dismissed. Because our system, I mean, it favors letting people have their day in court. And it favors letting people litigate their dispute. So granting a motion to dismiss without even letting a plaintiff proceed to that point is really not, that goes against kind of what our system is set up for. So the judge says, all right, we're going to assume that, for purposes of considering this motion to dismiss that what Dykstra alleges was defamatory. And Darling says, for his part, fine, go ahead. For purposes of my motion to dismiss, just assume I was lying about it. This libel-proof plaintiff doctrine insulates me anyway. All right, so that's how the court kind of sets this up. So you'll notice too that when we talked about the tort of defamation last week, we laid out the elements of defamation. It has to be a false statement of fact, meaning not an opinion. It has to be published to a third party, meaning somebody other than the person who is being defamed. And that statement has to have harmed the person's reputation in a way that they've suffered some damages, something that's compensable. So New York, it's a New York case, they lay out what New York requires for defamation. I think they do a good job of breaking it down. So they say, to state a claim for defamation, a plaintiff must allege a false statement that is published to a third party without privilege or authorization, constituting fault as judged by, at a minimum, a negligence standard, and that causes harm. So that's very similar to the general definition that I gave you on Tuesday to defamation. This is just how New York specifically defines it. Then the court goes on to say that, Shanti, to your point, Dykstra has conceded in this case that he is a public figure. So in addition to those elements of defamation that I just read, New York is going to require a plaintiff who's a public figure to also prove what? Actual malice. That's right. And what does the court say actual malice is? Or let me ask y'all this. In your own words, after reading the case, what do you think actual malice is? What does that mean to you? How does the court define it then? Let me move to that question. I see that it says actual malice means that the statement was made knowing its falsity or with reckless disregard for the truth. So that's actual malice. What that would tend to exempt is statements that were made in good faith, that there was a good faith basis for believing. This is just, I knew it was false and I said it on purpose anyway. Or I should have known it was false and I had a reckless disregard for even figuring out whether it was true or not. So that's how the court defines actual malice. The court also talks about the different competing interests that are at play here. On the one hand, for a person who's accused of defamation, what is the interest that that person is seeking to have protected? I speak, I write, I do things. What's my what protects my ability to do that? Freedom of speech. That's right. So that's one of the interests that the court is interested. I mean, we want to protect an individual's right to speak freely. On the other hand, the other competing interests we have on behalf of the defendant, on behalf of the plaintiff is what? What's that person's interest? What's Lenny Dykstra's interest? His reputation. That's right. Protecting somebody's reputation and protecting somebody from being lied about. Good. Say that again, Noah? And the money you probably get from it. All right. So interestingly enough, I think I want to show you, if you read this closely, the court says, talks about how it's difficult sometimes and complicated to discern opinion from fact. That those lines are blurry and it's not always so black and white. The court also talks about how a label, just a label, is more like an opinion than a fact. So the court's example is, in defamation cases involving allegations of racism, labeling a person with an epithet such as racist or Nazi without anything more, generally the courts have treated that to be an expression of opinion or hyperbole. But if you go further than that and you falsely attribute specific biased statements or actions to a person, then that's more like a statement of fact that would give rise to a claim for defamation. So somebody calls me a Nazi, the court is saying I'm going to have a harder time proving defamation than if somebody said he is a Nazi who frequently tweets statements that are consistent with Nazi beliefs or something like that. What do y'all think about that? How does that strike you? I could call you, William, a Nazi, but that might not be enough for you to sue me for. How does that strike you? Do you feel like that's probably the right place to draw the line between a label and then more, or not? Right, and make no mistake, I'm not saying it's okay to label people. I'm just saying that the court is pointing out that might not be enough for you to sue somebody for the tort of defamation. Nick.
I would say that, like, that, like, last point, nobody's gonna buy that. Like, if I come up against you and I make up all this stuff that didn't happen, that means people might actually believe that, depending on my reputation. If I just go up to someone in front of a bunch of people and insult them and then leave, that's not gonna affect their reputation. Because most people are gonna be like, what?
All right, so you said something very important. Defamation, one of the elements, remember, of defamation is that you got to prove that it harms your reputation in some way. And so I think what the court is saying, and what I hear y'all saying, is just shouting or speaking or writing a label about somebody doesn't hurt a reputation as much as attributing something specific to back up that label. Does that make sense? Again, I'm not saying it's okay to label people that. I'm just saying, won't you see the distinction?
Commonly having to deal with name calling issues.
Yeah, and don't we? And we also expect there's a certain amount of with name calling, we don't give that as much credence as we do specific stuff. If you could sue somebody for defamation for bad labels, yeah, the courts might be overwhelmed with that. And listen, did anybody pick up on what did the judge say at the end of this opinion about one of the reasons that he dismissed this case with respect to the court's time and resources and all that? What'd he say, Emma?
He was basically saying that there's people who actually have proper issues that will actually hurt their character.
Yeah. He said, stop wasting the court's time. There are people who have really been wronged. And this is a waste of all of our time and resources for us to try to split hairs about whether somebody who's already known to be a bad person is a worse person. The judge really took a shot at Dykstra there at the end. Yeah, this judge didn't have much patience at all for Lenny Dykstra. So then the court goes on to talk about this idea of the label proof plaintiff doctrine. And the court says it's only applied in rare circumstances. And it applies to people whose reputation and with respect to a specific subject may be so badly tarnished that he cannot be further injured by allegedly false statements on that subject. So the court, well, we're not quite there yet. How do y'all feel about that? The idea that a reputation might be so bad that they lose protection under the law for defamation. Okay, that's a good point. It's not blanket necessarily. So can you think of something, Noah, that Darling could have said about Dykstra that might not have fallen within the scope of what Dykstra's reputation was already bad for? Falsely accuse him of abusing women. Yeah, I was about to say. I mean, that's similar to some of the things he had before. Nick. Okay, that's the one that comes to mind to me, that he was a sex offender dealing with children. Maybe if the allegations were that he was a child molester, that he had sexually abused young children. I think, this is my opinion, I think that that's a lot different than what his poor reputation was already, what he'd already deserved having a bad reputation for. So I don't think that the libel-proof plaintiff doctrine means that you're exempt forever. I could also envision a situation where I'm making this up, of course, but let's say that Lenny Dykstra has a reputation of being a criminal and a racist and a misogynist and all these bad things in the 80s. And then maybe he spends the next 30 years founding a charity, going to seminary, becoming a clergy, and he's got an exemplary record of service and good works and all that for the next 30 years. And then somebody comes along and brings up new allegations against him. I think that might be different too. So it's not blanket and forever. Yes, Noah? Well, the statute of limitations wouldn't apply because Dykstra's not being prosecuted or sued for that. Right. I mean, that's right. It's just his reputation in that case. Nick.
I was going to say, yeah, it's kind of like he did that thing. Like, you can say, oh, well, he's changed, but he doesn't get to be like, well, those things didn't happen. No, they haven't. We have records of that.
That's right.
So it's like,
that's a good point.
So is it fair to do it? And is it legal? Yes.
Yeah. I think you're exactly right on that. I mean, yeah, I think that the distinction, yeah, if the allegations were that he did these things before he was reformed, I mean, that might protect the speaker or the writer in that case. All right, so then the court has laid out here's how we evaluate these kind of cases. Here's the law that we're going to apply. And now we're going to take the facts of this case and we're going to examine how the facts of this case fit within that legal framework. So, what was Dykstra's argument? If you're Dykstra's attorney, what are you arguing to the court about why the libel-proof plaintiff doctrine should not apply? There's some good arguments that his lawyer made. Not good enough. That's right. They weren't good enough. There's some good arguments that he made. One was that Dykstra says that Darling just said these or wrote these things because he knew that there was no evidence that would corroborate or disprove the story. So, yeah, easy for him to say, start making allegations about something that happened 30 years ago that nobody can even remember and that there's no record of. He shouldn't be able to just make stuff up without being able to back it up. He's just trying to sell books, make money, get publicity, and get revenge on me because we had some prior beef. That's what this is all about.
Yeah, because he didn't even try to say that he didn't defame him. He's just said that he already had a bad reputation.
That's right. Now, if this case went to trial, Darling's defense would consist of evidence that the statements weren't false. I mean, he would use the defense of truth. But for purposes of his motion to dismiss, he's just saying, Judge, even if we assume that what I said was false, he still can't make out a case because he's libel-proof.
Well, it's like one of those things where it's like, he just wants to sell books, okay? If I write a book about a famous public figure who's been tried for murder and has been like really belligerent to the press and said all these awful things, like, yeah, I'm just trying to sell a book, but also, like, it still doesn't hurt your reputation further.
Yep.
So, like, it's still, I don't think that matters.
So the court said, really, even though the main question was whether or not, the question before the judge in this instant was whether or not Dykstra was libel-proof, the court did address whether there was actual malice. And the court found that Dykstra really didn't have any evidence, couldn't show any evidence that would support actual malice in this case. So even if he wasn't libel-proof, the court is kind of saying, yeah, your claim still would have failed because you couldn't prove that extra step of actual malice for a public figure. All right, so then the court goes into talk about whether or not Dykstra is a libel-proof person in this instance. And the court lists a laundry list of Dykstra's bad acts. Convictions, all these cases he'd been sued for, non-payment, breach of contract, threatening people, pleading guilty to lewd conduct charges, assault with a deadly weapon with a female employee. He'd been sentenced to jail, fraud, embezzlement, grand theft, lewd conduct, assault with a deadly weapon, and that all of these had received a very high degree of publicity because of who he was. And the judge says that had already established his general bad reputation for fairness and decency, far worse than any of what Darling is trying to say Dykstra did. So the court says, and I think Nick pointed this out, the court came down pretty hard on Darling. Court could have just said, I find that you're libel-proof and here's why. But the language the court uses really kind of slams him. And so the one paragraph says, given the aforesaid litany of stories concerning Dykstra's poor and mean-spirited behavior, particularly toward various groups, including racial minorities, women, LGBTQ community, the court finds that as a matter of law, the reference that Darling made cannot induce an evil opinion of Dykstra in the minds of right-thinking persons. That evil opinion has long existed. So then the court talks about that it still has to balance Dykstra's interest in having his reputation not be harmed against society's interest in promoting free speech, free expression. And the court says it sees no legal basis for why the court should use its very limited time and resources litigating, trying to figure out whether or not Dykstra engaged in yet another example of bigoted behavior over 30 years ago. The court this is a waste of time. All right, so the conclusion in this case was that because the court found that Dykstra was a libel-proof person, his complaint for defamation against Darling should be dismissed. So Darling won the case. I do want to point out, I put this in the notes, but New York's, the naming of their court system is so weird. This case says at the very beginning, it was decided by the Supreme Court of the state of New York for New York County. Their Supreme Court is not like our Supreme Court in Georgia is the highest court in the state. Their Supreme Courts are like entry-level trial courts where you begin your cases, similar to the superior courts in Georgia. But it just drives me crazy that they call something Supreme Court when it's not the highest court, because we're so used to the Supreme Court means as high as you can go. Yeah, that's kind of what supreme means. Like, what court is, what do they call the courts above their Supreme Court of New York, right? Yeah, super Supreme Court. All right, so that's the Dykstra versus Darling case. And that's an example of how a court analyzed a real case of defamation. I want you to pull up now in your content module the document that says for class 3-2. And I want everybody to take 3 minutes to read this fact pattern. Just even if you've already read it, read it again to refresh your memory. All right, as we discuss this fact pattern, the question is, what torts may or may not have been committed and why? Not crimes. Remember, not crimes. So the labels that we use are important. I don't want you to think in terms of Johnny stole something. I want you to think in terms of Johnny committed the tort of, and name it, based on the torts that we've discussed in this class. And then not just what he may have committed, but why. So Johnny may have committed the tort of assault because when he took a swing at Rusty, he placed him in fear of his safety. Okay? So that's how I want you to think about answering these type of questions. Johnny Swanson is my protagonist that I use in all my fact patterns. And he is an idiot. First and foremost. Have I told y'all one of Tebow's laws? for a living yet? Have I talked to y'all about Don't Be Johnny? Most people are idiots. That is one of my laws. Most people are idiots. So by the end of the semester, I will say to you, most people are, and you all will say, idiots. That's right. Okay? No one that takes any of my business law classes are idiots. So that exempts all of us. But in my experience, most people are idiots. Sometimes I'm an idiot. I have been an idiot many times. I would like to think that on the whole, my life is not defined as an idiot, but most people are idiots. Anybody disagree with that? Anybody want to take issue with that law of mine? All right, good. So, this fact pattern describes a feud between Johnny Swanson and Rusty, his sworn enemy. They've been fighting for a long time. They have competing convenience stores. They're located across the street from each other. So, first thing that I want to read, and then I want you to tell me what tort we might be dealing with and why. Johnny has filed over 12 lawsuits against Rusty in the past year alone, accusing Rusty of things like being stupid. We have a possible tort here. Say it again. It is a label. It is a label. So 12 lawsuits in 1 year for things like being stupid. What tort does that fit that we talked about on Tuesday? What's the name of the tort? You said it, Noah, and you said it, Emma. Say it again, Emma. I think you said it. Did you not say it? Noah said it. Abusive litigation. Abusive or frivolous litigation. Yep. So this is both. 12 lawsuits against somebody in 1 year's time for something like being stupid is abusive. It's also frivolous. But let's say that Johnny was suing Rusty for, well, I was going to say if he's suing him for legitimate stuff, 12 lawsuits in a year might be abusive. But if it's not frivolous, then I mean, you've got the right to bring as many lawsuits as you want to, as long as there's some merit to them. So yes, the answer to that would be Johnny may have committed the tort, or Rusty has a claim for the tort of abusive litigation because 12 lawsuits in a year for something that has no merit, like being stupid, is abusive and frivolous. All right, so that's the way we want to answer these questions. Last Christmas, Johnny snuck onto Rusty's roof at night and swiped Rusty's Christmas decorations, which Johnny then displayed on the roof of his own store. We got a couple of things here. Well, say that again. Did he swipe them or snatch them? Why do you ask that? That makes a difference in what we might be charging him with. Right. Good point, Jaron. Robbery is crime. So we're in torts. I love the way you're thinking though. That's exactly right. So what torts plural might Johnny have committed here? Invasion of privacy in what way? He did. Trespass is the most appropriate one. So, all right. So I heard trespass and conversion. So Noah, answer it this way. Johnny may have committed the tort of, or Rusty may have a claim for the tort of trespass because why? Right. Which, by the way, we talked about trespass to land and trespass to personal property. Which one would this be? Both. Good answer. All right, so how is this this is trespass to land because why? He went on Rusty's land. So if you look at the elements of the tort. This may be trespass to land because Johnny entered onto Rusty's land without permission. Right. That meets the definition of the tort of trespass to land. So you said also trespass to property, to personal property. Johnny's actions could be trespass to personal property because why? Yep. Look at the definition of who's got that in front of them. The definition of trespass to personal property. Take that definition and apply it to these facts. Or otherwise interferes with the owner's right to exclusive possession and enjoyment. Okay? Right. Notice it doesn't say, let me make sure I read correctly what I wrote. He swiped them. It doesn't say he damaged them. But Jaron is exactly right. The part of the definition that might make him liable for the tort of trespass to personal property is that by taking them, he deprived Rusty or interfered with Rusty's right to possess and enjoy them. All right, so again, the answer to that would be Johnny may have committed the tort of trespass to personal property when he took the decorations because he deprived or interfered with Rusty's right to exclusive possession and enjoyment. So again, we're taking the definition of the tort and we're applying it to the facts of the situation. Excellent. There is another tort, and you said it, Noah, besides trespass. So we nailed trespass to land, we nailed trespass to personal property. What else do we have in this one sentence? What other tort? All right, good. I like how you're thinking. That's right. Johnny may be liable. In tort law, we're liable. Criminal law is guilty. Tort law is involves liability. So I like the way you phrase that. Johnny may be liable for the tort of conversion because, if we look at the definition, because he wrongfully possessed or used the personal property of another as if it was his own. Good. That's exactly how I want you to start thinking about these. All right, so that was 3 torts in one sentence. Next sentence is, just last week, Rusty rented a plane to fly over town with a banner that reads, Johnny's Go-Go sells hot dogs made from cats. Business has been slow ever since. All right, so using my framework, Johnny may be liable for the tort of what? Defamation, because he made a false statement of fact, right? That was published to a third party, anybody who can read the plain banner. And what's the other element of defamation? That it had to have harmed. Business was slow, right? Well, yeah, I mean, well, if there was actual malice, what would Rusty have to show to prove actual malice? That he knew it was false or there was reckless disregard for the truth. Okay. So I don't think it's fraudulent misrepresentation because let's look at the elements of that. Yeah, and he's not trying to induce anybody to buy something. He's not trying to get people to buy it. I mean, he's trying to get people, I guess, not to buy it. All right, so that's a great question. What's the difference between fraudulent misrepresentation and defamation? Defamation, in order to prove a case for defamation, an essential element of that is that it has to harm the person's reputation. Fraud is a false statement of fact that is made with the intent that the other person will rely on that false statement of fact to do something like buy a product. Yeah. Fraudulent misrepresentation is really a tort in the commercial sense. I'm trying to think of something I could say to y'all that would be fraudulent misrepresentation that, I mean, I guess I could say something like, your assignment is not due until Tuesday when it's really due on Monday. That might be fraudulent misrepresentation. Yep. So defamation is, so let's split some hairs here for a second. The statement on the banner that was flying behind the plane said Rusty's One Stop sells hot dogs made from cats. Is that libel or slander? It is libel because it's written. Defamation, the defamation part of that would be that Rusty sells things that are illegal. I think it's illegal to sell cat dogs, or hot cats. I don't know what you call it, whatever that is. I just don't even think about that. But there's another tort with respect to what Johnny's saying about the product. We talked about that. What is that? Defamation is specific to a person. The tort of disparagement of property. Remember that one from Tuesday? So Johnny may be liable. Johnny may have committed. Rusty may have a claim for the tort of disparagement of property because Johnny published false information about another's product and the quality of it. Disparagement of property. All right, good. Let's see what's next. Let's stay here for a second. What if I had not included the fact in here that says business has been slow ever since? What if my sentence just said Johnny flew a banner over town that says, oh, I got this wrong. This was Rusty talking about Johnny. What if all I said to you was that Rusty flew a banner over town that said Johnny's Go-Go sells hot dogs made from cats? Then what argument could you make that you might not have defamation or disparagement of property? that we might be missing the element of damages, right? I'm not saying it did or didn't damage Johnny's business. I'm just saying you didn't have enough. You might not have had enough information from that. So that's how I want you to think about these things. That you can make some assumptions here and there in your conclusions. All right. The next thing is that in retaliation for that, Johnny had T-shirts made up that said "Rusty's One Stop Sucks," and he printed them or he gave them away free with every gas purchase. Do we have a tort here? All right. If we did have a tort, Nick, what would it be? If we did, because you gave a defense. You're correct. But opinion is a defense to the tort of defamation. Because why? Right, because defamation requires a false statement of fact. Right. So a good answer to this might be Rusty might have a claim for defamation because Johnny made this statement about him. But Rusty has a defense. Johnny has a defense because there's a real question about whether or not the statement is a statement of fact or not. Johnny thinks it is, right? Facts. Rusty sucks. It's facts. Johnny's defense would be that's an opinion. Good. It could be true. Depends on if you're on Team Johnny or Team Rusty. All right, Rusty is enraged and marches across the street to fight Johnny and settle this once and for all. The two men square off. Johnny swings at Rusty and misses, instead hitting Ronnie. Ronnie is the person who was an innocent bystander. Ronnie. So actually I have a student in my next class named Ronnie. Yeah, it'll be fun. She got punched at the gas station brawl. All right, do we have a tort here? And if so, who committed it? Who may have committed a tort here? Who did, William? Come on, who committed the tort in this case? Johnny swings at Rusty and misses, instead hitting Ronnie. It was not Ronnie. I'll give you a hint. It ain't Ronnie. Ronnie can sue. I think there's more than one person that can sue here. I think we got more than one tort, believe it or not. And Johnny swings at Rusty, misses, and hits Ronnie. Johnny may have committed the tort of battery. Who said battery? Kennedy. Against who? Against Rusty or Ronnie? He hit Ronnie, he missed Rusty. So he may have. All right, assault on Rusty and battery on Ronnie. All right, he may have committed assault on Rusty, Emma, because use the definition of the tort. What does the tort require, or tort of assault? Because he put Rusty in fear. His actions put Rusty in fear, reasonable fear of his safety. Well, I just made an assumption that it was reasonable fear. He put Rusty in fear of his safety. Rusty would have to prove that his fear was reasonable. Anybody think that his fear was unreasonable? No, somebody coming up and taking a swing is pretty reasonable that you're in danger. I would argue, right? All right, so that was assault on Rusty. Why isn't it battery on Rusty too? Because he didn't actually touch him. That's right. So you said, Emma, battery on Ronnie. Johnny may have committed the tort of battery against Ronnie because he Battery is an unwanted physical touch, right? Yeah, that's right. All right. Well, what about the idea? Does Johnny have a defense to the intentional tort of battery because he didn't intend to hit Ronnie? Does he have a defense there?
Yes, I mean, his defense is, I didn't mean to hit her, I meant to hit another guy.
Remember, this is intentional tort. That defense isn't going to work. Why?
He wasn't intending to hit somebody.
But what do we call that? You're right. He did intend to hit somebody. No, negligence is unintentional torts. That's next week. Oh, there's a term for it. We talked about this on Tuesday. That's transferred intent. Remember, if the person committing the wrong act meant to commit the act, but the result just happened to a different person, they still could be liable under tort because of transferred intent. All right, there is another. There's another tort in here we hadn't talked about. Johnny swings at Rusty, misses, and hits Ronnie.
Ronnie, guilty of wrongful interference.
No. Ronnie is not guilty for wrongful interference with a business relationship. First of all, guilty is a criminal law word, and that's just not right. There's another one with respect to Johnny and Ronnie. Johnny swung at Rusty, missed, and hit Ronnie. Definitely have battery on Ronnie. Could we have assault on Ronnie? Good question. It depends on what? If Ronnie what? If Ronnie was aware that Johnny was swinging. I mean, I didn't say in this fact pattern whether or not Ronnie was looking or paying attention or even awake, conscious. So you got to think like a lot. I want you to think about both sides of these things. Just because Ronnie got hit doesn't mean it's also assault. We would have to know that Johnny's actions were placing Ronnie within a reasonable fear for her safety.
Johnny just like ran up one. Ronnie's not paying attention. The fault's not there.
No, but the battery still is. I mean, those are two different torts. If Ronnie had no idea that he was in danger of being hit, then we don't have the tort of assault, because the tort of assault requires a reasonable fear of danger or harm coming. So that's how we got to look at these things. We have 3 minutes, so let's keep going. Johnny then kicks Rusty in the head, and Rusty bites Johnny's ear. Very quickly, what torts might we have there? Okay, that's all right. Let's talk about the torts first. We might have, so split that up. Johnny kicks Rusty in the head. What might we have there, Noah? Okay, we have, which one of those are you sure we have? Battery. Which one of those might we have? And what would that depend on? Whether Johnny's actions before he kicked him put Rusty in reasonable fear for his safety. Good. Very good. They're in a fight, so I mean, it can be hard for Johnny to say that. What about the idea of self-defense? Can either of these guys use that? Do we know? We really don't know enough about the situation. Yep. All right. Good. I like the way you're talking. You're Rusty's lawyer. Self-defense. Give me your argument on that.
Johnny has attempted to hit Rusty once and then actually hit him.
Johnny started it. That's right. He started it. Rusty was just defending himself. He really might have the self-defense could fly. Very good. So these fact patterns are not all black and white. There's not just one answer to them. I want you to think about them from both sides. All right. What about, I wrote this back when COVID started, so this might not be the same today, but Rusty posts an unflattering poster of Johnny in the store window right next to another poster that says, "Beware of coronavirus." Any tort you can think of there? If there was a tort, what would you argue? You're Rusty's lawyer. What are you arguing? What tort are you arguing that Johnny's committed there? Not defamation, because he didn't say that Rusty was spreading coronavirus or had coronavirus. Potential infliction of emotional distress. Probably not, Kennedy, just because I don't know that would be extreme and outrageous conduct. But there is a tort. We don't say something bad about somebody, but we imply something bad about somebody. What do we call that? No, not negligent misrepresentation. That's next week. No, not fraudulent misrepresentation. False light. False light. I think we're out of time. So, Tuesday, we will hit negligence and unintentional torts. I'll just be lecturing on Tuesday. So nothing you need to do for Tuesday. The only thing you've got to do between now and Tuesday is finish your assignment 3.1, and most of you have already done that. Mr. Grove. Okay, you need to do that. All right. Okay, anybody have any questions? All right, we'll see y'all next week. We can.